Jennifer, it's so exciting to be here with you today talking about our new book, Embracing God's Design.
It's good to be with you, Walt.
Who is actually going to benefit from reading this book in your view?
I think there's so many different audiences that can benefit from this book. The first one are counselors themselves, right? Because we have some material in there where we really address the gender dysphoria diagnosis and what is wrong with it. So certainly counselors can benefit from having that knowledge base, but parents, we have information in there for you, how to keep your kids safe. We have information for people who are wanting to go back to embracing God's design for their life and what that process might look like, and just kind of some real practical guidance.
I don't know of another time when they've had a book has been put together by a trauma therapist and the person who suffered from the trauma. This is really magical to have the therapist and the individual who suffered come together and write about why this is happening and why we're seeing this.
And we brought all of that experience to the table to really produce a resource because the end goal really is we want to see people saved, healed, and delivered. We want to see them walking in the fullness of who God has called them to be in God's identity and not a false identity.
Order today at embracethedesign.com.
Well, good afternoon. Good to see you all, and great to be here with you. My name is Matt Sharp. I serve as Senior Counsel and Director of the Center for Public Policy at Alliance Defending Freedom. For those of you that may not be familiar with ADF, we are a legal organization that defends the God-given right to speak and live the truth through litigation, working on policy with many of our policy allies and friends in the room, lawmakers across the country. Very excited for the next few minutes that we're going to get to share with you, because we're going to dive into some of the gender identity issues that are facing our country, and specifically concerns about women's privacy. Now, I'd like to travel back in time with you to the great year of 2016. And around that time, there was a group of very strong, courageous leaders in North Carolina that includes my good friend John Rustin, that's sitting right back there, that realized that we were facing some grave threats to women's privacy by men being allowed to enter into these spaces, particularly in our public schools. And so North Carolina became the first state, through their leadership of the North Carolina Family Policy Council and some great lawmakers in North Carolina, to pass the so-called bathroom bill. And this launched, many of you may remember, a slew of just outcry across the country. The NCAA boycotted the state. Here in the home of the NCAA, right? NBA was threatening it. 68 corporations, Apple, eBay, all of these others wrote this amicus brief against the state and were threatening to pull out. All this national outcry over the simple proposition that a man does not belong in a women's restroom. Well, in response to that, many states, I think, sort of backed away from the issue, and we had these sort of dark ages where no one wanted to talk about bathroom bills. No one wanted to address this issue. All the while across the country, we were hearing story after story of young women having their privacy violated, of men entering into women's locker rooms, restrooms, exposing themselves, of men going into women's prisons and doing awful, terrible things to the women in those facilities. And it was happening more and more. But thankfully, we've had an awakening on this. And what that seed that was planted in North Carolina has now begun to grow, so that across the country, we are seeing more and more states take concrete steps to protect women's privacy. In fact, as things stand right now, there are 19 states that have in some measure protected women's privacy, whether it's in public schools. Some states, as you see, have gone beyond just the school context to look at what do we need to do in some other facilities. And so we're going to dive into this today because we think this is the next great issue that we want to see spread across the country, that we want to make sure that we're protecting women's privacy, not just when they drop their young daughter off at school, but in so many places and facilities. And to do that, I'm joined by two incredible women that have been leading the charge on this issue across the country. And I want to start to my far right, your left, with Sarah Beth Nolan. Sarah Beth is our legal counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom, our policy expert that's been helping to craft many of these laws, testify, work with our policy allies and lawmakers to help get these laws passed. So Sarah Beth, let me start with you. As I mentioned, a lot of people have focused on this issue in the context of just public schools, specifically K-12. Do you think that ought to be our focus, or do we need to broaden this? What are the spaces that we need to be thinking about as we're seeking to protect women's privacy?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It's a great first step, but there are many other steps that we can take. I think several states have taken the step of doing restrooms in K through 12 schools, but we're also seeing that this issue is prominent in their changing spaces, in locker rooms, and that's an important facility to include, and also their sleeping accommodations. We have had several clients that unfortunately, their daughters get away from home and find out that they are assigned to a bed with a male student. And as you can imagine, scared and petrified and humiliated along with that. So protecting going past restrooms and also including those spaces are important. We see it in K through 12, but we can also extend it to public higher education and making sure that those girls are protected as they go off to college. Some of the families that we've had the opportunity to work with, one family, the Wales, their daughter had experienced this. They sent her on her first away trip as a middle school girl to Washington, D.C. with school, and they get a call on her first night away that she has been assigned a bed with a male student, and that she is concerned at how to bring that up without being harassed and bullied, and doesn't want to hurt her fellow students' feelings, the male student as well. And through pressure from the chaperones that were not helpful to her, her parents were finally able to intervene. But had they not been able to, there she finds herself away from home, and that's her first experience. Another family that we've been able to work with, their daughter unfortunately went through terrible sexual harassment in her locker room as an athlete, and was so scared and humiliated to tell her parents what was being said to her at school that she, through tears, asked if she could write it down for them instead of saying it out loud, because it was so traumatizing to her. And so they've come forward. So those spaces are really important as those girls are growing up and then going off to school to make sure they're protected. We've also seen this issue go to domestic violence shelters. We've had the opportunity to represent a domestic violence shelter that serves women overnight and is really the only facility like it in the area. But we're pressured to invite men into the fold, and were approached specifically by one man who was very aggressive in being admitted to the women's sleeping area, where, because they're the only facility like it in the area, to maximize their capacity, they keep cots about an arm's length apart for all of their women, and they chose to prioritize those women who had fled these situations that are often at the hands of men, and were attacked by their city not once but twice to shut down, and they stood firm for those women, and they're luckily still serving their community. And then we see this issue even more prominently in prisons and juvenile correctional facilities, where women are being terribly abused and forced to share cells and shower alongside men. And we see this as a problem. Even the state of California has admitted that's a problem. A few years ago, they implemented this policy to allow males to transfer into women's facilities. And the Solicitor General's office issued a report 2 years after that policy went into effect, and they had nearly 400 men asked to transfer, and pages of the women in their own words telling their concerns and their experiences. And there's really nothing that prevents a male sex offender who is currently serving a sentence for a sex crime against a woman to transfer into women's facilities. And so they saw surprise that many of them were and had asked to be alongside the women. So those are a few of the facilities that we can include, and we've seen a few states go as far as public buildings, like Arkansas, so that when you take your kids to the park, they're protected. When like Steffi and I have to work in the state capitals, that we are able to use the restroom with privacy and dignity. So those are some of the options that are available.
Well, Stephanie, let me bring you in here. You serve as Chief Legal Counsel for the Arkansas Family Council, and you guys this year, a few years ago, you had passed a K-12 privacy protection, but this year, you guys decided we're going to make a priority to go all the way. Walk us through what all your law protected, kind of the thinking behind it. Why did you guys decide to make this a priority?
We sensed a political moment. We sensed that we had an opportunity and we needed to take this issue and run with it. Like many of you, we had previously won the battle on women's sports, and that testifies to the biological reality that there is such a thing, shock, as male and female.
Blowing our mind here, Stephanie.
Right, yeah, it's radical, isn't it? So we sensed that political moment and opportunity, and we also loved that the law defined male and female accurately in state law. So it was a way, as a Christian organization, that we could also be telling the truth, that there is a distinction between the sexes that is part of God's good plan and just a beautiful reality for us all to live out God's design for our lives. So we loved both those aspects of the bill. One important thing to mention, the bill does not govern private spaces. That was important. Privately owned spaces. It definitely governs private spaces, but so for example, we are not regulating private businesses. If you are a private business and you want to have a radical policy that makes me not want to shop at your store because you have a radical policy, we can leave that to the free market to deal with that. So we were dealing only with publicly owned facilities, and while we were at it, we wanted to get them all. The only thing we looped in, domestic violence shelters that receive state funding grants are covered as well, because if you are receiving state funding, then you need to manage this funding in a way that protects rather than jeopardizes the safety of women. But I also have to make a plug for ADF. I know that one of the reasons we were willing to make this a priority was because we knew we had the support of ADF, and Sarah Beth came to Arkansas and testified and trained one of our sponsors and provided resources. So I would definitely encourage you that if you want to run this type of bill, definitely get in touch with ADF and let them serve as a resource for you, because they are wonderfully helpful on the bill.
Well, thank you for that very kind word. Sarah Beth, let me turn back to you, because as we're looking at the map up here, places like Arkansas, Louisiana, Montana, and others that have passed very comprehensive protections, walk us through what a good bill needs to look like. If you're working with a lawmaker or a policy group here, what are those key components that need to be part of that legislation?
Absolutely. So like Stephanie mentioned, we start with definitions, and they are the strong foundation that you're going to build everything off of. So we really want comprehensive definitions for male, female, and sex. It is a crazy moment that we have to be so specific about what we are talking about, but it is important to craft those carefully. So there are definitions like Arkansas and like Idaho has used that are comprehensive in that they include individuals that may have a intersex or a disorder of sexual development. They are included because those individuals are still male and female. And that makes it important on the back end, if the law is ever to be litigated, that litigation goes well. So strong definitions are the start, and we've seen that they have not been challenged in Arkansas, and that they've been upheld in Idaho at the Ninth Circuit. So looking to those to kind of build your foundation off of. The next thing that we look for is to require those facilities to take reasonable steps. The point of these bills is to be practical. They're supposed to be common sense and something that is workable. And that's what we're telling lawmakers as we're crafting the language. And so requiring them to sit down internally, because this will look very different for a prison than a school, to say, this is what our policy is. These are the steps that we need to take for our facility type to make it practical and protect our girls, putting that responsibility there for them, that requirement. And then we also look for a few exceptions, and those would be fairly narrow, but they are for, say, a medical emergency, that the paramedic can come into the restroom if there is an emergency. Those are important, again, on the litigation side, to make sure that we provide those. And we often see a provision that Arkansas included as well, that this legislation should move alongside and work together with the Americans for Disabilities Act. And that will often come up in hearings. And so putting a provision there that says this is not counteracting, it is actually working with that is important. And then we look for a legal remedy, and those are important and often a big topic of discussion. But you can pass the most beautiful bill, but without a cause of action, if something happens, there's no recourse for that young girl, for that woman. And so that is the teeth that we're looking for. So whether it's a private cause of action, whether it's attorney general enforcement, when you pass it and you're doing using the political capital for this, that you want to make sure that they have an ability to recover or get some sort of relief in their space. So those are a few of the things that we're looking for along the way.
So, Stephanie, as you and your team at the Arkansas Family Council were working on passing this, you guys came up with a great game plan. And I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through some of the things that y'all were considering, the strategy points that those in the room could maybe draw from your experience. So maybe first want to talk about finding the right sponsor. What were you looking for?
Well, I have to give all the credit on that to my colleague, Erin Hogan at the Arkansas FPC. She did an amazing job picking two wonderful sponsors. One of the sponsors did not have a history of running these types of socially conservative bills, but he was in leadership, and so it was a big win that she was able to get him on board. And the hearing where he presented this bill, it was amazing because you could tell he really had not had time to study the issue extensively, but at the same time, because, you know, he's in leadership, like we really had a fairly easy hearing. Much harder, multi-step hearing on the House side. But on that side, we had a socially conservative champion who had lots of followers and whose voice really mattered in the legislature, who didn't shy away from tough bills. And she had a history of pushing her bills through to the end. So Erin did a great job on getting just the right sponsors we needed for this particular bill.
Another issue that came up and that we've seen in a few states is fiscal notes. They'll try and throw a fiscal note to either derail it to another committee or get, fiscal conservatives uncomfortable with it. What happened in Arkansas? How did y'all navigate that?
Oh, yes. You have to bring back a little PTSD. So the session was about to end, and it was the very last day for the bill to get out of committee on the House side. We had tried to run it before, but things were running out of time in Arkansas. So we had our moment. We thought we were about to get this voted out of committee, and then a Democrat lawmaker throws a procedural roadblock of, suddenly the Democrats are interested in fiscal stability. How
convenient.
Yes, exactly. So this Democratic lawmaker had a sudden epiphany where he wanted to pursue fiscally responsible steps. So he asked for a fiscal impact study. I panicked at that moment. I was already on the chair and had started testifying, and we were answering questions. And what I knew was most of the fiscal impacts had taken weeks to get in Arkansas. And I thought, only if the Lord intervenes will we see this bill through this session. And it's easy to say, okay, why didn't y'all just get the fiscal impact in advance? But, that's a double-edged sword because you never know what staff member is preparing that fiscal impact. So if you get an agenda-driven staff member, you can get a fiscal impact that looks like, oh my goodness, this is going to cost $200 million if you don't let men go in women's restrooms. So there's always a risk on that front. But God came through for us, and we saw that fiscal impact come through in a matter of a few hours. And it said what it should say. It said $0 because the legislation we were running, it only required reasonable steps. And in Arkansas, our bathrooms already have signs that, are male and female designating signs. So reasonable steps can be as cheap as type up a few sentence policy and keep the sign on the bathroom door. So fiscal impact could have derailed our bill, but that was our God moment on this bill, this legislation.
Shows the importance. We've got to be willing to push back even on things like that because
absolutely,
for all of human history, we've had separate men's and women's facilities. So to come up this idea that there's this heavy impact, fiscal impact from simply saying what we've been doing, we ought to continue doing and make sure we're really doing it now is ridiculous.
Right. And we had some lawmakers saying, so we actually have public building restrooms that don't have signs already? Is that what you're trying to tell us? And I would say that if you have a lawmaker that's on the other side of this issue and they are pushing for a fiscal impact, the first thing to do, of course, is to say, there's no fiscal impact, so it's not needed. And that is, our legislator did try to take that approach at first, so I would definitely try to run it that way at first.
So speaking of obstacles, it wasn't just the fiscal note. You guys also had a lot of common objections that, Sarah Beth, you've also heard in other states. What were some of those objections they were bringing up in Arkansas? How did you respond? And then Sarah Beth, maybe if there's some others that you've encountered as well.
I'm sorry, do you want to start first?
Go ahead,
or do you,
okay.
Go ahead. Okay, so we did have some ridiculous comments, things like, I can't vote for, this was a Republican lawmaker saying, I can't vote for this bill because what if a man needs to go in a women's restroom and use the changing table? And I could not help but be a little riled up at that point because my husband and I have 7 kids. He has changed thousands of diapers at this point, just like I have, and he would not be caught dead going in a ladies' room just to get a changing table. You have other options to change a diaper instead of violating the privacy of girls and
including
women in
the trunk
process.
of your car, right?
Right. I mean, literally anywhere. He would go outside, anything. He's not going to go in the women's restroom to change a diaper. So you always have those nonsensical arguments that are put out there that really don't make sense. But what was actually wise is our lawmakers, our sponsors, did not try to go into crazy hypothetical land. They did not get drawn into that. They kept their messaging tight. Another thing that you will see in some of your states, you will hear like, well, is this not just bullying and being mean to trans men and women, trans girls and so on? This is bullying. But what my colleague Erin and I found, we were the ones being bullied and the other women who worked at the Capitol. We had this hearing where men dressed as women showed up and they started to use our restrooms as a political statement. And the women who worked in the Capitol did not feel safe going in those spaces that particular day. And we really need to take back that conversation. This is common sense. This is not controversial. This is the way we have lived all of human history where we have had private spaces for women. We have kept those safe from men. And we definitely did not. When you actually see the man in lipstick and a dress who is asserting his right to go in your young daughter's changing areas, your tone automatically gets a little bit stronger. as a mom or a dad. And I believe that we have to keep that strong tone. I believe that's why we won the issue in Arkansas. If we had backed down and been a little bit more wishy-washy, we may not have brought it all the way through.
One final one we hear pop up. Isn't this a solution in search of a problem? Is this really happening in our state? How do we respond to that?
It's happening in all of your states. Just acknowledge that it is. If you want to test it, run this bill and see who shows up at the Capitol to assert their right to go in the public pool locker area with your daughter. You will be alarmed and you will say, oh yes, we needed this bill more than we ever thought we did. And if you say, okay, well, why don't we have headlines about this on the state? Who wants to put their little girl out there to be a news headline? I don't want my little girl to be a news headline. I would rather, this is an area where we take some of the brunt of the challenge as adults. Let's bear this load so our girls don't have to.
Great. So Sarah Beth, Stephanie kind of hit on this, but the importance of good messaging, that we obviously want to be compassionate to people while at the same time standing firm to say, this is wrong. Women should not fear walking into a locker room or restroom. So as you've been working on this issue, what do you see as some of the key messaging points that we need to make sure we're incorporating into everything when we're talking about these bills?
Absolutely. And to piggyback off of what you said about stories coming forward, that is a huge ask of a teenage girl or any woman. And we need brave legislators to come through on that issue, to ask them to sacrifice their future sometimes in the media for this, and then come and be harassed at the Capitol. It is a huge sacrifice for a lot of those girls. So brave legislators, the brave girls will follow you if you give them a voice. But when you back down, you're telling them to back down too and to not vocalize. So I think that's an important point that we've seen across several states. As far as messaging, I think it's really important that we're intentional when we're talking about gender versus sex. We say all the time, these bills are about sex. This is written into your biological code. It is unchangeable no matter what hormones or surgeries or how you feel. This is who you are, male or female. And so avoiding the discussion entirely about gender identity, I think, is really important, because you're putting those feelings or those struggles aside to focus on facts. So when we refer to males and females, a lot of times there's a struggle on, do I call this person a trans woman? Is male. And we should be intentional about talking about men and women. And this is such a biblical truth, just like the video was saying. It is a biblical message that the Lord created us male and female, and that he did that intentionally and without mistake. And so this whole ideology is built around twisting that biblical message. And I think that's important to say, no, this is actually what is true. And we will continue to stand firm in that. And although it rubs some emotions sometimes, it is true. And we do best when we tell truth, and that we are not the judge of that, but the Lord is. And I think the Lord blesses that. So being intentional with the way that we talk about people, and also making sure that we're respectful and provide dignity, because that is also a biblical message as we're navigating these. We can have a strong tone and a truthful tone and be respectful. We see a lot of times in hearings that sometimes that is not offered to us on the other side. But is it important that when they get up to speak and it is confused and emotional, that we're able to give them the floor and give them their time and be respectful in return? And so when we're talking about legislators talking to the media about the issue, or their peers about the issue, it's not villainizing people, but it is being firm that this is a safety issue in a lot of these spaces. And that kind of gets to my next point, is that it's an urgent issue. We see that sometimes when there's hiccups in states, legislators would like to prolong it and say, we'll just come back to it if it's going to cause too much fuss. We don't have that kind of time. And when you hear women and young girls that testify, you recognize the woman that's placed with a man in her prison cell and she's being repeatedly raped, she does not have until next session to handle the issue. It is really important hour by hour that we get to it. It is the girl like the Crosses who she is being harassed in the locker room. And I think it's important that when we're talking about that, what we're saying when we don't is, even though it makes you really uncomfortable to expose yourself to a man against your will, you have to. And there's never an instance where I think we would agree with that. And so there is a sense of urgency that we never want to compromise safety and dignity of someone for someone else's feelings. And that's really what we're discussing. And we kind of talked about it a little bit, but I think you can be very firm depending on if you're passing a comprehensive bill and it has some of the prisons and the shelters, that can be very strong in tone versus when you're talking about minors in a K through 12 school setting. You are talking about minor boys on the other side, and I think that's important to keep in mind. But I think that the Lord has honored that respectful and firm tone going forth in truth.
Yeah. So we've got just about 60 seconds left. Sarah Beth, I know we've focused a lot on privacy, but one of the things you've been working on is other ways that we can combat gender ideology, eradicate it, other protections we need to be doing. We just earlier today got a great victory at the Ninth Circuit on behalf of a mom that was wanting to adopt and told she couldn't unless she affirmed a child's gender identity. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of that mom, ruled against Oregon on that. What are some of the other bills, issue areas that you think some of our friends here ought to be looking at and that we would love to partner with them on?
Absolutely. There's so many. There's so much work that we can be doing. There is accurate ID documents when we're talking about male and female and how often we use our IDs, passing to make sure that those are accurate. Another thing that we're looking forward to is defunding gender surgeries and hormones and looking to do that all across the states. Another thing that you can look for are speech and the various ways that we can protect our speech, but especially with being forced to use inaccurate pronouns and names and losing their livelihood over that. We see that in a lot of different spaces, and so we can pass bills to protect our speech. And then even protecting licensed professions, we're seeing all across, and now at the Supreme Court with counseling sessions, counselors, biblical counselors that really want to help these kids and these people that are struggling with gender and their sex and understanding who they are, being forced out of their profession entirely because they would like to speak into that. And so those are just a couple of the ways that you can kind of tackle gender identity and this ideology that is so pervasive.
And at Alliance Defending Freedom, again, we would be happy to partner with you all, serve you in any way as you're looking to protect women, kids, and families in your states from this harmful ideology. So with that, please join me in thanking Stephanie and Sarah Beth for their great work on this.